You're listening to Let's Get It On with Big John McCarthy and Sean Wheelock.
Big John McCarthy has witnessed the best that the UFC had to offer.
That is it! Game, set, match! We have a new champion!
Your backstage pass to the world of mixed martial arts and combat sports on the Lineup Media Group Podcast Network.
Let's get it on!
Hey everyone, welcome to Let's Get It On with Big John McCarthy and me, Sean Wheelock. On every episode of this podcast, John and I give you an inside look at MMA and combat sports, always separating fact from fiction. On today's program, we'll be joined by Jim Ross, truly one of the greatest commentators in the history of professional wrestling, to discuss MMA, boxing, old-time catch wrestling, and of course, kayfabe. Remember that you can download and subscribe to our podcast on the iTunes Store. For Android, download the Stitcher app and subscribe, and you can go straight to our website, letsgetitonpodcast.com. Let's Get It On is brought to you by Audible.com. Get a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/letsgetiton. There are over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, and MP3 player. Well, the links between MMA and professional wrestling are certainly extensive, dating back to UFC 1, which of course featured Ken Shamrock, who at the time of the event competed in Japanese Puroresu, and Pride, which was co-founded by professional wrestling star Nobuhiko Takada. Many early MMA stars, including Dan Severn, Akira Maeda, and Volkan, all had successful careers in the world of works before moving on to the world of shoots. And John, clearly there's always been, and I think continues to be, a significant amount of crossover between the two fan bases in North America, in Japan, and globally.
Oh, I think there's always going to be a crossover. It's a form of fighting. Professional wrestling has got all the moves that we use in MMA. They just do them in a little bit different fashion, and there's the entertainment factor that comes from it of trying to make it look different. But, there's always going to be that crossover because we have guys that, they've fought and they've wrestled and they've done it all, and they're going to have that whole thing. And you're seeing, really what you're seeing in MMA out of pro wrestling is you're seeing guys that are using the pro wrestling model of selling, of getting people interested in talking, that's really come about, and it's really working for a lot of the guys that are, becoming the major stars in MMA.
When I started as an MMA commentator, I was really shocked to learn how many people in mixed martial arts, how many fighters at one time were like you, like me, absolutely adored professional wrestling. It seems like with North Americans, it's probably 90 or 95%.
It's, going to be a lot. I think, everyone's attracted to different things, but if you're a kid that's attracted to fighting and things, pro wrestling was the ultimate of fighting because they were so, big and strong and they've, fought for so long. They were so tough and could put up with so much, and as a kid, you believed it. Now when okay, maybe it wasn't quite real, but still what they did and what they do now is still very athletic and takes a lot. It takes a lot from the wrestler. It's very difficult to do. They're great. They're some of the best stuntmen there are as far as the falls that they take and some of the punishment they take. And in doing it day in and day out, we're talking about doing this, so many days out of the year. It's incredible what these wrestlers put up with.
Absolutely. There's no question about it. And the people who say, oh, it's fake, it's not real, the outcomes might be predetermined, hence that their work's not shoots. But the level that they have to put their bodies through as performers, as entertainers, as athletes, it's just spectacular.
Yeah, it's actually, it's incredible when you look at it. It's also sad because, they're getting injured and they're having to then go out again while they're injured. And this leads to a lot of problems in their lives and stuff. And it's unfortunate, that occurs. But, you can take nothing away from what a professional wrestler does as far as trying to entertain the crowd. They are putting their butts out on the line. They're taking huge falls. They're taking huge hits. And then just, going in the back, knowing it's going to happen again 2 days down the road. I'm going to have to do this again. And so that's not an easy job. It's not what people think.
Well, we're now really pleased to be joined on Let's Get It On by Jim Ross, one of the greatest commentators and most popular people in the history of professional wrestling. He's currently the English language play-by-play commentator for New Japan Pro Wrestling and the host of the outstanding podcast, The Ross Report. And I'm honored to say that Jim Ross and I are now working together on CBS Sports Network's new pro boxing series, Knockout Night at the D. JR, thanks very much for being on the program.
Oh, it's good to be with you guys. My pleasure. Thanks.
JR, so before we get into the interview, I'm going to tell the story on the podcast. I've said it a couple of times in media interviews that I've done to illustrate what a great guy you are. So back in March, you and I did Your Show fights with Roy Jones Jr. and the MMA fighter Byron Phillips. It had the grappling match, Chael Sonnen versus Michael Bisping, which wasn't much of a grappling match. So you and I are talking. I had never met you. I've been a lifelong fan. Never met you until that show. We do this show, I know you 3 days. The day after that show, I get a call from the producer of the boxing series on CBS Sports Network saying, JR recommended you. We'd like to hire you, Sean. And I'm thinking, I've known Jim Ross 3 days and he gets me a major gig. I have friends in this business 20 years who have done nothing for me. That really shows the type of guy you are, Jim.
Well, hey, it's selfish in a way, Sean. First of all, I'm glad to help good people, and you're a good guy, without question. You're very talented.
I appreciate it.
But, to cover my own ass, I don't want to work with some slap nuts. I want to work with good guys, and I believe that you're a great broadcaster, and that helps make my job easier. So there's a selfishness involved in it, but I'm glad that it worked out, and I'm glad we're going to be doing another one on Saturday, May 21st.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, Jim. And John, you see, this is the whole key to what I do in life. I surround myself with people like Jim Ross and Big John McCarthy, and I just kind of try to ride the coattails.
Yeah, it's obvious that JR hasn't been around you long enough. Okay, because he wouldn't be getting. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah,
it's like, who's this giant Mark from Kansas City in the Central States territory?
Exactly. JR, how you doing, brother?
Good, man. Can't complain, John.
That's outstanding, man. I want to tell you, I've always enjoyed your work and what you do. You've always made, wrestling entertaining beyond what the athletes are doing. So you did a great job. You continue to do a great job. And I'm glad to see you getting into other sports, boxing and a little bit into MMA there. That's outstanding that you're reaching out like that.
Well, I like challenges. I like new. I think all of us at broadcast, and at least my take on it, is that we're all basically storytellers. So if you like the product that you're working with, which I think helps, you don't have to like it, but it always helps, and you're willing to work hard and prepare, then just go out and tell your stories. And that's kind of what we do, or I do. And I like working with Sean and Josh Barnett, different deal. Josh is on the pro wrestling side, but we approach it as storytellers. So I don't approach any of these gigs I'm doing any differently. They're all the same basic fundamental skill set, but it's fun, And I also make it clear that I'm not an MMA expert. I'm a fan, big fan, and I'm a boxing fan, but I am a storyteller, and so we leave the expert stuff to guys like Sean and Al Bernstein and Josh Barnett, guys like that. So I know my role, and I don't overcomplicate the process.
JR, I really like watching you with Josh Barnett on New Japan Pro Wrestling, and it feels like throwback commentary. I think a lot about when I first started hearing you on television. Another pro wrestling commentator I liked a lot, Gordon Soley. I used to watch as a kid on Georgia Championship Wrestling. You actually call moves. You're telling a story, you have a narrative arc, but you're also calling moves, and it's really refreshing to hear that.
Well, I appreciate that. That's our goal. Access TV said, hey, JR, this is your gig, and we want you to, you're the lead guy, whether, for better or for worse. And so, we want you to call the matches. We want you to be what you did back in the NWA days and 80s and early 90s and things like that. And I said, well, can you do that? I said, of course I can. So then later, I'm talking to a friend of mine who's in the wrestling business and who is a broadcaster, and he said, congratulations on your new gig. How are you being produced? And I said, well, they count me in, and they count me to break. That's it. And I like it that way. So, and that way if we suck, then it's us sucking. But, if we mispronounce a name or misidentify somebody, they'll stop us down. But they're not there to overmanage, micromanage, which speaks back to my statement about not overcomplicating this damn thing. So I talked to this guy, and he's a gainfully employed broadcaster, and he says, well, what do you do on your shows? I said, well, you should listen, but I just call the matches. He said, really? What else? I said, well, no, that's it. How do you do that? I said, what do you mean how? I mean, if you were calling a football game, what would you be worried about? You call the game. They put the images on the screen, and you call the damn thing. That's what we do. That's what we did for years. But now all these guys are so prisoners of social media and upcoming events and other shows to promote, all this promotion, that you're hearing one thing audibly and you're seeing another thing. So it can't help but disconnect or confuse the viewer to some degree. So I like what we do, and it may be a throwback, but to me that's the way that the game should be called. And whether you're doing MMA or boxing or whatever, we can't be bullshitting about everything in the world while there's action going on. That doesn't make any sense to me. I can't bring myself to do that.
Jim, the thing I want to talk about is you are a wrestling historian, and everyone looks at pro wrestling today and what we have. We've got the Triple H's and the Rocks and people like that, but real wrestling back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, wrestling was America's biggest sport, and we had some incredible superstars back then. We had, a lot of people don't know, if I say the name Farmer Burns, you know who it is. Martin Farmer Burns was this incredible catch wrestler, and we had, Ed Strangler Lewis, and these are the people that really started with real wrestling and got it into where it was more of a pro wrestling. Give us a little bit about how you utilized all that knowledge of those people and what they did into bringing it into what you talk about today.
Well, I think that it's important to know your past, or you can't, the old cliche, you can't navigate your future. I look at, learning. I worked for Leroy McGurk, who was a tremendous amateur in the 30s. And he knew a lot of those guys that you're mentioning. A lot of that. Ed Strangler Lewis used to hang around the wrestling office there, and he lived in Tulsa. Did Strangler, and because he was one of Danny Hodge's mentors when Hodge first broke in the early '60s. But to me, it's like if you're going to broadcast baseball and you're going to broadcast, let's say for any team, pick out a team, the Dodgers, whatever. You'd know, like Ben Scully does, you'd know all about the history of the Dodger organization, the Brooklyn Dodgers, the L.A. Dodgers, the championship teams, the Drysdale and Koufax, all this stuff, Jackie Robinson, the whole 9 yards. So to me, that's how I would motivate the viewer, or try to motivate the viewer to not blow off the wrestling for just being a showbiz presentation, and give them the realness of it, and the great athletes that created the foundation of the business that we know today. It's not the fans' fault that the business itself has sometimes gone off the rails for their presentation to being eyeball rolling and ridiculous. But I can just tell you that I have great respect for anything I'm broadcasting. You have to have respect, or it doesn't work. I mean, you got to figure out that you're going to respect what you're doing and learn about the history and the heritage, and then that folds into, why am I watching this event? Like Sean and I doing boxing. Sean and I could both tell you, Sean. We don't have a plethora of household names on this card. We got great young prospects that have lofty records, some earned and some inflated. Duh, that's boxing. It's MMA. Everybody pads a record to some degree at some point in time. More often than not. I shouldn't say all the time, but more often than not. So we got to tell stories of these guys. Joe Blow watching at home at midnight Eastern time doesn't really care about, he's got a great left hand. How many times do you say that? Really? And why am I watching this yahoo? Well, he's the youngest of 13 kids. He was in the Marines. He was an all-state football player. He wrestled. He's an MMA guy part-time. I don't know what the hooks are, but it's up to us to find out what those are so we can incorporate that in our storytelling. all the while, remembering the history and the heritage of pro boxing. The same thing in wrestling for me. I was brought in the business by guys that had great respect for the business, and they were the quote-unquote cookers, the shooters of the business. And that's how they approached everything. They wanted me to broadcast everything as if it was a real sport, without going over the top and making it, this eyeball rolling affair. So that's kind of how I approach all my broadcasts, respectfully, and if excitement's there, then by God, give it to them. If it's not, you can't shine shit.
JR, I think something that confuses a lot of people who are not serious pro wrestling fans is that if the matches are worked, if it's a predetermined outcome, why was it so important, even probably through the 1970s, maybe even into the early 1980s, for guys to be able to know how to shoot, meaning that they could really fight?
Well, you didn't want your guys to get into a compromised position with a civilian. You didn't want, back in the old days when you had the traveling world champion, whether it be Ed Lewis or Luthez or Vern Gagne or any of those guys that were great, one of the members of the inaugural NFL Hall of Fame class, Bronco Nagurski, was the former NWA champion while he was playing in the NFL. As a matter of fact, he was an all-star, an all-pro, and took a season off to wrestle because he was making infinitely more money in pro wrestling at that time. Speaking to John's point about it being such a big sport back in the day, so he took off a year of football, much to the chagrin of the Chicago Bears, to wrestle. But I think he did it for, you didn't want some ambitious young stallion to get in the ring with you in Podunk and beat you. And because now they're a made man, and it wasn't planned. It wasn't what was best for business. So you had to be able to take care of yourself so that if the choreographed conclusion was not going to go down, that you had the ability to take it matters into your own hands and make sure that the outcome was what was most desired. And then the other thing, Sean and I talked about this before, when I worked for Bill Watson, Mid-South Wrestling, he had a very physical territory, very hard physical style, not less on the flying and the flying Walinda stuff, but more on the mat wrestling and contact, impact. That if you got into a fight with a civilian in a bar or a restaurant or wherever the hell it may be, and you got whipped, you're fired. End of story. Didn't matter if you're on the top of the card, the bottom of the card, you're somebody's brother-in-law, somebody's son. The house rule was this: you lose a fight to a civilian in my territory, you're fired. And so what the guys did, at number one, they traveled in small groups, because the guys that we had, like Steve Williams, the four-time All-American at OU in wrestling and played in 4 bowl games, guys like him that would walk into a bar with 2 or 3 of their buddies who are equally as bad, they didn't have a lot of fights. And the other thing is that, they learned to talk the way out of situations. They learned to be good, like being a good bouncer. You could defuse things verbally if you are smart sometimes. So that was the rule there. It was always about being, we know we're showbiz, but if it came down to brass tacks, by God, you better be able to go. And that's kind of what, and I don't know if that's that, I don't think it's that way anymore to any large degree. I don't think.
Do you think any current wrestlers really know how to shoot? I mean, we talked a lot on this program about CM Punk trying to transition to MMA, and he has a UFC contract. But as you look at active guys in professional wrestling, do you think any of them really know how to fight, really know how to shoot?
Oh yeah. There's guys that have good amateur backgrounds. Dolph Ziggler was a good amateur at Kent State. I can't remember the UFC guy that he was teammates with. Another Kent State guy. I think it was. God dang it, I can't remember the guy's name. We'll think of it when we go off the air.
I know John Hawk from Bellator wrestled at Kent State. I don't know if that was the same time.
Where did Koscheck wrestle?
Koscheck wrestled at University of Buffalo.
Okay, wasn't him then. All right, that's one we've eliminated. Good job. Ziggler was a great amateur. Jack Swagger was a 3-time All-American at OU as a heavyweight. And of course, Brock Lesnar, I think, could probably handle himself in most physical situations that would arise. But those are three that come off the top of my head, but there are other guys, and there are a lot of guys that came from football and things like that, and I don't know what that means, but it probably means that they're probably tougher than the average bear, but can they handle themselves in any environment? I don't know that, but there are a lot of guys that are still tough guys. Samoa Joe is a tough guy. A lot of those guys have had, the new guy, one of the new guys in WWE, Nakamura, Shinsuke Nakamura, trained with, in Inoki's dojo in Southern California back in the day, and Samoa Joe was in that group. And so there's a lot of guys that have had MMA training, football, boxing, amateur wrestling. So there's not a lot of them, Sean, not like there used to be, but there is still a good handful that you wouldn't mind walking down an alley with.
So, when you look at the difference, there's so many the lineages as you look at wrestlers. It's very similar to the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu lineage or now the MMA lineage there is, but you can go back and when you're looking at all of these Japanese wrestlers and Japanese MMA fighters, basically they came from the lineage of Karl Gotch. Karl Gotch was the one that really started New Japan Wrestling. And one of his students was Antonio Inoki. And you look at all of the lineage that goes from Karl Gotch down the lines of wrestling in Japan, but also into the lineage of MMA fighters from Japan, being, one of the greatest, because, Sakuraba, there's a huge influence, especially in other countries, of professional wrestling in MMA.
Yeah, exactly. And see, I love that history. I love that stuff. To me, it just adds credibility. Depending on how good a communicator you might be and how good a wordsmith you might be, that's just great information to be able to put into any kind of presentation. I think. There's relevance there, and it's real and it's true. So, but Karl Gotch was he was a freak of nature. He understood the leverage. He was a little bit of a crazy bastard. That he was somewhat sadistic. A lot of guys. He was not real popular with the masses in pro wrestling because of the fact that he was very intimidating. And most of the guys were not even near his level of skill. So Karl could be a little bit of a bully when he wanted to be, but to say that he wasn't that godfather and the guy that helped get a lot of stuff established would be completely wrong on my part. He's a legend. But, sometimes those great legends, you guys know, they're like Danny Hodge. There's a little screw there that might not be as tight as it should be, but he was a different breed of cat, too. So all those guys that were on that different level, they're a different breed of cat, and they have their own little picadillos they bring with them to the dance. And you learn to work with it.
JR, you just mentioned Danny Hodge, and Danny Hodge, for people listening to the program who are big collegiate wrestling fans, the Hodge Trophy, which is given annually to the top collegiate wrestler in the United States. You and I were having dinner, and you were telling me your Danny Hodge stories, and there are all these legendary names out there, whether you're talking about John L. Sullivan or Hickson Gracie or Judo Gene LaBelle. I think you put Danny Hodge number one for all-time tough guys, don't you?
Yeah, well, obviously, I'm very biased. He was my boyhood hero. He and Mickey Mantle were the two big dogs out of the state of Oklahoma when I was a kid growing up, and in athletics, and that's a lot of us migrated to athletics in some form or another. But Danny Danny never lost a match in college at Oklahoma University. He was a 3-time All-American. He's a 3-time national champion, and that was
with 3 pins.
It was before the era of freshmen were ineligible, so he couldn't wrestle as a freshman. Ironically, he went to the Olympic Games right out of high school, his first Olympic Games, so there's no doubt in my mind that he would have won another national championship if freshmen had been eligible when he was in college. So he goes to 2 Olympic Games. He gets legitimately screwed out of the gold medal in the 56 Games, and a lot of the Cold War stuff really came back and bit him in the ass. He was wondering what to do after winning 3 national championships in pro wrestling, and he decided to take up boxing. So he in his first year of boxing, with no formal training, he wins the United States Golden Gloves heavyweight title. So he's a freak of nature. He's a guy that can legitimately crush apples with his grip. He can break pliers. He had the tendon strength where he would lock up with a guy and grab him by the wrist in this hand fighting, and they'd go right to their back because the pain that they were experiencing was nothing like they'd ever had in their life. And I can tell you from experience that there is credence to that statement, because I refereed his matches as a pro, and he'd play around with you and grab you by the ankle and squeeze, and you want to piss your pants. It was embarrassing to have hurt, and the shrieks from grown men, 300-pound guys that he would toy with, he'd grab, and they'd be like little children, in his hand. So he was he had that great strength. He could box, great hand speed. He was so good as a wrestler. I believe it was his senior year, but it might have been longer. But I know his senior year, he didn't give up a point, guys. He didn't get escaped. He didn't let anybody up. He shut out everybody or pinned everybody his senior year and on his way to winning 3 titles. So people say, could he beat Brock Lesnar? Could he beat Kurt Angle? Well, I signed both Brock Lesnar and Kurt Angle. They're phenomenal guys. But I talk to old guys, old shooters, who know Brock Lesnar and Kurt Angle, and say, could they beat Hodge? And guys look at me with a smile on their face. There's no way. So for a guy that Hodge wrestled at 220, won national titles at 177, how would Hodge mathematically hang with Brock Lesnar, who's 280? I don't know the answer to that question. It's a very fascinating thought, but I can tell you that the guys that allegedly know say Hodge is the best. So I give them my benefit of the doubt, and it suits my taste. It's great for my memory. It's great for my being a kid again. Hodge is the guy.
Let's put a little bit. Danny Hodge is one of my heroes, and I met Danny Hodge long ago, and he is such an incredible man. But Danny Hodge, when he wrestled at Oklahoma, Sean, this is what people don't realize. They didn't wrestle as many matches back then as they do now, but he was 46-0 in his collegiate career, with 36 of those being pins. He only went to points on 10 matches in his collegiate career.
It's insane.
So he was just absolutely so dominant. The one thing that, when JR said something about he had, maybe a little screw loose, I think it's because of his dad, because his dad had a lot of screws that were loose. His dad actually stabbed a guy that he was competing against and stabbed him so bad the guy had like 70-some stitches. That was he got arrested.
Yeah, that was in a pro wrestling match in Oklahoma City. Danny, again, that indoctrination in that era. Danny never, as the cliches in the business, the colloquialisms, he never smartened his dad up. So in other words, Danny's dad was a believer that everything he saw, especially involving his son, was real. So when his son was bloody and was selling, Dad would get all crazy, and so one night he got too carried away, and he took his knife, and he not only stabbed Angelo Savoli, who he stabbed with all the stitches. It was almost 100 stitches. It was one of the most. It looked like a murder scene. But Danny, in the process of trying to restrain his father, got stabbed as well, inadvertently, obviously. So the dad had one of those old redneck country pocket knives that just, shave your hair on your arm. And so, but Hodge never smartened his dad up. So his dad thought everything was. When this villain was cheating to gain the unfair advantage over his son, the dad said, "I can't stand it. I can't stand it anymore. I got to do something." So that Hodge's the whole thing. But Hodge's dad, when Danny was little, was very abusive. Very abusive. Danny was basically raised by the firemen in Perry, Oklahoma. And they'd set him in the corner and give him a newspaper and tell him to twist the newspapers. And that's how part of that hand strength developed over the years, sitting there all day twisting a damn newspaper. So, but he's a freak of nature. I can tell people how strong he was, but until you experience it and you feel the pain, as I have, and it happened so long ago, guys. Hell, I'm 64 years old. This happened when I was in my 20s. I can vividly remember the pain of never wanting to experience this again in my entire life.
Dave Jansen, the Bellator lightweight, told me that he heard when he was young about Danny Hodge in the newspapers, and that's what Dave Jansen has used as a pro MMA fighter to increase his grip. It's difficult to find a newspaper in the year 2016, but to continually twist and wad up those newspapers with both hands for grip strength.
Yep, absolutely. Well, it's a... I threw a thing out there the other day. We're always looking for clicks on our. I sent out a tweet the other day that said, I'd like to see, at WrestleMania 24, we had Floyd Mayweather and WWE against the Big Show. It absolutely made little sense on paper because of the disparaging size of the two men. Big Show is 7 feet and 500, close to it, and Floyd Mayweather is what he is, and 160 pounds maybe. But they put on a phenomenal performance, and because of Floyd's showbiz acumen, which is pretty uncanny, actually, whether you like it or not. He's a hell of a showman. But that got really good when it got real, when Floyd popped Big Show in the nose and broke his nose when they shot the angle on television, and it was explosive, and it was all of a sudden it took a whole new meaning. It wasn't a novelty match anymore of the big guy and the little guy. It was I'm pissed off, the Big Show, I'm pissed off at Floyd Mayweather, and I don't give a shit if he is a great boxer. I'm not going to compromise myself in this match after him breaking my nose. The hell with him. So if it gets me fired, so be it. So there was all this undercurrent of stuff going on. It was really intriguing. So I'm saying you got Paul Heyman representing Brock Lesnar, and you got Conor McGregor, who needs some direction and a rudder put back in the water. I wouldn't be shocked somewhere down the road at a WrestleMania you wouldn't have a McGregor-Brock Lesnar match or something like that. It's just a special attraction, not a shoot, but it might end up there, but certainly a unique showbiz presentation that we can all agree, I think. It may be horrible, I don't know, but we can all agree it's intriguing.
JR, I want to ask you about something that I've become oddly obsessed with, and that's finding pro wrestling shoots on the internet. And it seems like, from my sort of trained eye as a mark and growing up going to Memorial Hall just about every Thursday night of my young life in Kansas City, Kansas, that the fights, the pro wrestling matches that turn into shoots began as works. They didn't go in as shoots, but somebody gets mad, they lose their temper. Two I can think of, Akira Maeda versus Andre the Giant, and then there was the Great Antonio versus Antonio Inoki. Both turn into shoots. What are some of the best shoots that you've ever seen? And did any of those start as shoots, or do they just kind of devolve that way?
I never in all my years saw other than somebody, maybe a one-off shot as a receipt for somebody, getting nailed. But a full-blown shoot like the Inoki Great Antonio thing, where Inoki kicked the guy in the face over and over.
Knocked him unconscious.
Yeah, that was ugly. The match was ugly. It was a freak show anyway. But I don't understand the Antonio's motivation, because you're in his country, and he's supported at that point in time, as I understand it, by the mafia there, what they call the Kazuka, or what the hell
Yakuza.
They are. Yeah, so those guys. So you're not doing real good. It's not very good, this strategy there, big boy. So, but I never saw it in the ring. I've seen guys nail somebody to get them to straighten up or get serious. I've seen real good fights in the locker room. But generally, the smart guys realize that, number one, shoots are boring in a pro wrestling environment. You strip down all the sizzle, and it's gone. And the fights are normally short and ugly. And so they generally, if you're going to have something like that, they settle them in the locker room. One of the best locker room fights I ever saw was a guy named John Nord. I think he wrestled as Nord the Barbarian, and he wrestled as a Berserker. In WWE, he had a good fight with Butch Reed, one of your Kansas City guys.
Hacksaw Butch Reed.
Yeah, played football at Central Missouri.
And for the Chiefs.
Mm-hmm. And they had a nice fight that started at 2 o'clock on Sunday afternoon in Oklahoma City at a matinee. Then that night at 7:30, 100 miles away, we ran Tulsa. We did that every other Sunday. And so when they got to Tulsa, Bill Watts, who was not in Oklahoma City, found out that they got into a fight. And he got them together in the back of the Tulsa Convention Center and in a big locker room, and he said to find out what's going on, and he found out that their fight was not quite over. They were ready for it to be over because they're all battered and bruised and bloodied and swollen. Two big guys beating the hell out of each other, and he made them fight again to finish it. I want you to finish it right here in front of me.
What was the outcome?
I think that it might have been Butch might have gotten a little bit of the better of the situation, but neither came out unscathed. It's like somebody says about fighting in the UFC, well, as long as they use 4-ounce gloves, anything can happen. And I think that's kind of what you had there. There's two big guys, bare-knuckle guys, fighting each other. And I think Watts kind of intervened to make sure that he's too smart to let them beat each other to a pulp so they couldn't go out and perform and make money for him.
You know, one of the things that I've always wondered, since you have such a history of professional wrestling, be it when it started out and is kind of real, who is the all-time greatest wrestler from the past, and who is, your opinion, the greatest wrestler of the present?
Oh man, well, John, if you're asking based on the criteria of the best wrestler being the best mechanic or the most productive as far as earning money for himself, his opponents, and the promotion, I kind of lean toward, because pro wrestling is showbiz, I kind of lean toward the media success, the tickets sold, pay-per-view sold, merchandise, things of that nature. If you're going to look at one guy that set the pace for everybody, or the numbers, you'd either go to Hogan, who was a great marketer and merchandiser, but then he was superseded by the numbers of Stone Cold Steve Austin in the late 90s, early 2000s. So I would go based on mathematics, going to Austin, which is not a surprise to a lot of people, because he and I are great friends, and still are, but the numbers speak for themselves. I remember one quarter of a royalty check that Austin made well over $1 million on a quarter, just basically selling T-shirts. So he made phenomenal money. It's a different system than his predecessors had, so he got a little advantage there. But I don't think anyone since has approached his merchandise numbers, his pay-per-view buy rates, the string of sellouts, and the ratings on Monday nights, and things of that nature. So I'd say Austin is the guy. And right now, it is a really unique thing. My favorite guy now is Brock Lesnar, not just because I signed him with Jerry Briscoe out of Minnesota when he wrestled there, but I consider him a friend. I like him. He reminds me of a lot of guys I grew up with, farm boys, rural guys, hunters, harvesters, they like to call themselves. But he's working part-time, so that takes a little bit away from it. But he's the biggest attraction in WWE is John Cena, John Cena. That's a fraudulent slip. He's number 2. But to me, Brock Lesnar is the number 1 guy in WWE, and certainly John Cena's right there with him. But Lesnar, maybe because he's not there all the time, allows himself to remain special. I think that's part of his magic. He's not overexposed.
JR, I want to ask you about kayfabe, the illusion. It's really not even an illusion. It was the full-blown culture in professional wrestling that you didn't break the fourth wall, that this was as serious as can be. Can you talk about what the culture of kayfabe was like when you started in pro wrestling in the 1970s and kind of how it's changed now today?
Well, it was strictly enforced and adhered to in the 1970s. I was smartened up on the way to the ring to referee my first match in 1974, I think it was. It was just a 10-minute draw, the first match of the night in Tulsa. A guy named Mike George, another Missouri guy.
Saw him wrestle many times.
Yeah, and against a fellow named Tretch Phillips out of Memphis, 5'6" guy with a 50-inch chest. He's a little freakish. They had a 10-minute draw. The guy said, you're going to do a 10-minute Broadway, JR. I wasn't JR then, by the way. A kid. Hey, kid, you got a 10-minute Broadway the first match. I said, okay, like I knew what I was doing. And they knew that it was my first match to referee, and they've been helping me to learn little things. But I had no idea what a Broadway was. I thought it was some sort of New York City thing, some match that had New York City inclinations. Little did I know it, Broadway just meant draw, time limit draw. That's what it means. So I had to ask my buddy on the way out there, I said, what's the damn Broadway mean? I said, time limit draw, kid. Okay. So I go out there and do a 10-minute draw with these two guys, and that was my first foray into the business. Point being is that you just didn't have, you always adhere to the kayfabe. It was so stringent that I traveled with Hodge and Skandar Akbar, who was a tag team partner at the time. His name was Jim Weave, a big Lebanese strong guy from Vernon, Texas. And there's some irony in that statement. Lebanese guy from Vernon, Texas, but he was really a legit Lebanese, guy, and he grew up in Vernon, Texas, and he was a power lifter. So, but they were fan favorites. They were baby faces. We'd walk into a great place to eat on a road trip, and if there were heels already in the restaurant, we had to leave. Period.
It's amazing.
In the story. It was like, well, we'll sit over here and they'll sit over there, and because if Watts found out that we fraternized, that's what he would call it, then everybody got fined. And I was making $25 to $40 a day. I didn't have enough money to be fined, so I would not have sat there. I'd have gone out and I'd have gone to my car or got a sandwich or something. I would not have sat there. I couldn't afford the fine, but we didn't have to worry about it because two old timers, Hodge and Akbar, who actually had seniority over the guys already in the restaurant, just adhered to the house rules, and we got in a car and went someplace else. So that's how it was. You did the whole thing. Bill Watts set up a mask guy one time to have a romantic experience with a fan, a groupie. They call arena rats, and he sent the girl to his hotel, masked man's hotel, and she convinced the mask guy to take his mask off. He took the mask off and to continue their relationship, and she says to him, "Kayfabe, you son of a bitch." So basically, she whacked her up to see if she could outsmart the mask guy to take his mask off, which were, that was the real kayfabe, because those guys had a miserable life because they had to protect their identity. So he set the guy up just to see if he would break the kayfabe, because he needed to know if he could trust the guy, and obviously there was a little trust issue there, and so he got busted. But the kayfabe was huge.
Is that all gone? Is that all gone now, JR? Is there any of it left?
Not much. There is some. Yes, there is some left. Yes, but is it as prevalent as it was previous generations? Absolutely not. And it's also getting more and more less prominent every year. So every new group of guys that come in, it's less important to them to maintain that illusion of enemies and rivals and things of that nature. It's unfortunate because they just outsmart themselves.
One of the things when I'm guessing really it was Vince McMahon that brought it forth that pro wrestling is sports entertainment. He actually came out saying, well, we're not saying it's not really, but it's sports entertainment. Do you think that was a good thing that he did at the time, or do you think that it has actually hurt pro wrestling?
Well, I think it's really a two-edged sword, and without straddling the fence here, he stepped up to address the athletic commissions, who were taking massive monies cumulatively over a year because they were monitoring and sanctioning pro wrestling like it was a real sport.
Yes.
So they could take their money, and it's not a real sport. So the question was, do you have the same sanctions when the Ice Capades comes to town, or the Harlem Globetrotters? Well, no, we don't. Okay, so then why are we being singled out? So that was the big reason there was financial, but I don't really think that was a big issue, John. It was an issue, and it was a big issue. I don't think so, but here's what I do think. I do think that people, they kept taking it to another level and another level. Enough wasn't enough. More and more. So that was kind of what I'm thinking, that it triggered other actions that has lessened the intrigue and the mystique of pro wrestling. You don't see David Copperfield doing a TV special and tell you how he made the Statue of Liberty disappear. I don't think. Maybe I missed it. Penn and Teller don't have a DVD showing how they do all their illusions. It's just, that would be not very wise. But the wrestling business has actually done that, and they've been their own worst enemy by and large with the exposés and the style of wrestling. They shoot themselves in the feet, and it's just a lack of attention to detail. Any of us three on this phone call, and I certainly would be the least. I'd be second hind teat on this deal. But if we mounted the second rope and they get your opponent between your legs and he's standing up in the corner, and you are unfettered, able to rain down 10, there's always 10 punches in his face, and it leaves no DNA, He doesn't get weak kneed. You don't bust your hand up. You don't chip a tooth, black his eye, bloody his nose, bust his lip, nothing. And then they can't understand why people laugh at some of the things they do, and it offends them. Well, they laugh at you because you're sometimes the things you do in the ring are absurd, and they're illogical. And your predecessors are rolling over in their graves watching poor execution. So I think it's just the business has issues, guys. It's not just one or two people. It's just how they have the priorities. And I on my podcast, I'm a grouchy old bastard. I get on the soapbox and talk all the time. You guys are going to screw the damn goose that laid the golden eggs here if you're not smarter.
JR, is it true that the tipping point was Hulk Hogan, and that a lot of old timers, when he was really at the pinnacle of professional wrestling in the 1980s, early 1990s, a lot of the old time guys didn't like him because they thought, one, he didn't know how to shoot, and two, he really didn't even know how to wrestle?
There was a lot of old timers that were really old tough guys, old hookers, the Carl Gotches of the world, Billy Robinsons of the world, Danny Hodge, Luthez's of the world, that were never major Hulk Hogan fans because they didn't perceive him to be have shooting skills. He wasn't considered by them to be a great athlete. So he was a lot more showman. He was more sizzle than steak. But all he did was break every box office record that they ever had. And I think there was some backlash to that too. Is that here's this guy, this big blonde guy, that's a basic guitar player in a rock band, and they tried to run him off. They had Hero Matsuda break his ankle in training.
Wow!
Just for the hell of it, to see if he would come back after he was healed. So, and it was all on his dime. His ankle injury and his medical bills were on his dime. They tried to run him away from wrestling in Tampa, where he grew up. And so they had the Japanese Hero Matsuda, who's an amazing man and a shooter, break his ankle. And so then the guy, he comes limping back, he's healed up. So they said, well, maybe he's got a heart, and he obviously had a heart. But the old guys never liked him because they just didn't see him being real. What would he do if he got into a situation where somebody in a bar wanted to fight the champion? He's going to lose, and it's going to make us all look bad. That's kind of their narrow cast or their narrow view of that deal. But, most guys were able to forgive him if they were on his cards because he was selling tickets, man, and he was making everybody money that was on his card. So it's, bitter guys, I don't know how it is in MMA. Do you have guys that are, I talked to a few guys, old guys, that are a little bit bitter because they came along in a different era, but wrestlers the same way. Hell, you can't pick when you're born. So, I think the best way to do it is to be happy for the guys that are doing it now.
Yeah, I can tell you that
go ahead, John. I'm sorry.
When it comes to the guys in MMA, you know what? People want to be on the pay-per-views when a guy that is good at talking, look at if you're with Chael Sonnen and you're good at talking and you're going to get people to pay money for that pay-per-view, obviously some other guy that's on that card that's possibly going to get some kind of pay-per-view cut, they're going to want to be on that card because of Chael Sonnen or Conor McGregor talking. And so in some ways, it kind of works the same. Not for everybody, though.
I agree. No, you're right. But the healthy way of I think the mentally healthy way of looking at it is, hey, just be happy for the guys that are doing it and, know that you're part of the foundation laid and take that as a source of pride and move on. So, but it amazes me when you talk about guys talking and communicating. It's all communicating. You're all salesmen. We're all salesmen in these damn things to different degrees. That more guys in UFC, Bellator, wherever the hell, any of the MMA, they got to find somewhere along the way. They got to understand that you're not being a wannabe pro wrestler if you're able to communicate. Go YouTube Cassius Clay and Muhammad Ali and all these things. Go Google things where you can hear sound bites from fighters. Because that's all the public and your promotion wants is a sound bite. Don't tell me how to make the watch. Just tell me, for God's sakes, what time it is.
JR, I have one more question for you, and then John, if you want the final question for Jim of the interview. But JR, one thing I noticed, being a child of the 80s and being a hardcore pro wrestling fan proudly when I was a little kid, when I started watching, beginning with UFC 1 and all the early UFCs, there were so many things that I recognized because I had no knowledge of catch wrestling or submission fighting, but there were so many things I saw in the early UFCs that I just knew from being a pro wrestling fan, just by different names. This thing I knew as a hammerlock was a Kimura. This sleeper hold was a rear naked choke. A figure 4 leg lock was really a knee bar. Did you pick up on that quickly when you started watching MMA, the DNA of catch wrestling that's in this sport?
Yeah, I still get it. I did, and good points all. I still get a kick out of the Kimura double wrist lock thing. I don't know why. I understand why it's used. I understand that the terminologies, where the origins are, and all that. But I even had a guy the other day on Twitter wanted to bust my balls about the fact that I didn't call a hold in New Japan. He wanted me to call a double wrist lock the hoverboard. Well, the guy that uses it calls it a hoverboard, but to me, it's a damn double wrist lock. Well, that's like saying, well, I want to call my headlock a head vice. Okay, you call it whatever the hell you want. I'm going to call it a headlock. Well, that's what it is. So that's kind of that deal. Yeah, I noticed it, but it's just funny. And if I want on USC nights, if I'm doing live tweeting, watching a show, and I want to create a shitstorm, all I got to do is say, what's this Kimura BS? It's a double wrist lock, for God's sakes. And then, boom, every MMA a hardcore fan having a few beers or whatever else is right on my ass, man. It's funny. It's just like sticking a barking dog with a sharp stick.
Yeah, I have the same problem when it comes to when I train officials. And I give them all these techniques that, hey, you need to understand this, do this. And I'll give them 120 different types of things that, hey, I'm going to give you a test. Tell me what this is. And a lot of them will come up with, something like, well, we call that the four corners. I don't give a shit what you call it. I give a shit what everyone else calls it, because It's not you renaming something. This is about you knowing. And I'm not going to sit here and try to figure out what someone else calls it. It can be called a couple of things. Like we do have a double wrist lock that comes from catch wrestling, and it is the same as the Kimura, and that came from Helio Gracie being, submitted by, someone Matsuro Kimura back in Brazil, in a match. So they named it after the person out of respect. But it's funny how some people come up with all these new names and stuff, and it's like, how the hell do you expect everyone to know what it is? I don't care what anyone calls it by themselves.
It's a trendy social media type thing in pro wrestling. I mean, all these wrestlers they're giving their holes, their finish holes, these new names, and the holes are not new more often than not. Some are, but more often than not, the holes aren't new, but you give them new names. And so then, you as a broadcaster, if you're not up with the current trend in social media and what these old holes that are being renamed are, then you're considered, a relic or something. And I don't mind being a relic. I like, that's why the company that I'm working for with in Access and Mark Cuban's group, they want me to call the wrestling matches as I see them. And it's so much more fun to go to work and be able to do that and be able to, try to entertain the audience and tell your stories and all that stuff. And then Sean and I come along with this boxing thing, and we both agreed we're not going to call every punch. We're not going to do. We know we're doing television, so we're going to narrate what we're seeing and not just be wall to wall talk. And I think that we tried that in our first outing, and I think it'll be even better this time because I think there's going to be only two of us in the booth, and that always makes it just a little bit more easier to navigate as a rule.
JR, I really appreciate you coming on the program with John and myself, and it's such a pleasure now to be able to call you both a colleague and a friend, and look forward to doing a lot of boxings with who knows, we might get another MMA, we might even get another Your Show.tv fight night.
Never know. Hey, I'll talk for food.
I'll talk for food.
JR, thank you very much.
Okay, guys.
Thanks a lot,
very much for having me on. I appreciate it. And let's get some people to download this show and have some fun with it.
All right, man. You take it easy.
Okay, guys.
That's the great JR, Jim Ross, joining us on Let's Get It On. For JR's podcast and blog, as well as to order his barbecue sauces, go online to JR's BBQ. No, I'm not mispronouncing that. I'm from Kansas City. I want you to get the web address right. It's JR's, no apostrophe, bar, the letter B, the letter Q.com. John, did you have any idea what a serious mark I was as a kid? You know, I don't watch a lot of professional wrestling now. I've watched a little more because I really like and respect Mauro Ranallo. I want to hear what he's doing on WWE. But probably from the ages of 5 through 15, I was just insane. I literally every Thursday night, I would go to Memorial Hall in Kansas City, Kansas, to watch Central State's NWA Pro Wrestling.
You know what? I loved pro wrestling from the time I was about 7 until I was probably about 10, when my dad basically shut it off for me. He goes, "That's fake."
That's enough of that.
Yeah, you know, but that's just the way my dad was, and that's okay. But, you know, it's a matter of when you know, if you know the history of how things happen and why, and how, you know, look at, you go back in history and if you look into it, you're going to find out that wrestling was the number one popular sport in the U.S. It was, you know, there was no real basketball. Baseball was just really getting going. Boxing really hadn't gotten going at the time. You know, Teddy Roosevelt, you know, one of our great presidents, he was enamored with wrestling. And then it actually had a guy named, you know, Asai Maeda come out there and perform against a wrestler and do so well, and he became involved in jiu-jitsu. So if you go back and you look at all the ties and how everything, you know, gets lined up and it intersects in so many ways, why pro wrestling ended up coming. You know, look at, people got, you know, the same way as they are with MMA in certain matches. You know, people get upset when there's not constant action. Well, there can't be constant action when two people are always good and you're trying to, you know, do things without getting hurt and not getting beat. And pro wrestling became that way of entertaining people and making it to where they believed, you know, what was going on was real, even though maybe it wasn't all real. And it was what, you know, led to a certain style of wrestling that, you know, we look at now as, you know, pro wrestling, and we have our amateur wrestling, but it all intermixes in MMA.
I know that Art Davie spoke to you extensively back in the earliest days of the UFC, 1993, 1994, about let's not make the same mistakes of professional wrestling when they were shoots, when it was totally legitimate. That's why Art talked to you and you talked to Art about this stand-up rule, because you didn't want to see the fights bogged down and start to kill the popularity and then maybe have MMA take a weird left turn.
Yeah, and it's, you know, you're looking, you know, people, you're always going to get somebody that looks at something and says, "Oh, you guys should never have done that," and everything. What you're doing is you're trying to look at what's the best for the sport overall. There's sometimes, you know, we'll do things that we look and say, "Hey, you can't change that. If you change that, you're changing the entire sport to a way that it's affecting what guys do." But there's times that you can look and say, "Hey, if we have someone that, you know, is just trying to stall," because, you know, the sport of MMA is not wrestling. It's not boxing. It's not judo. It's not jiu-jitsu. It's a combination of all of these things. And within all those things, we can get one athlete that tries to stall the fight in a way that is not entertaining for the fans. And when you look at everything overall, look, it's the fans who put their money down to go buy tickets. It's the fans that put their money down to watch on TV at times. It's the fans that, you know, take their time to support the sport, even if it's on free TV. They're the ones that you have got to entertain. And if you're not doing things that are going to keep their attention, then you're going to lose them forever. And the sport has always got to be looking to see, what do we need to do to keep the competition fair? But we've also got to do things that make it to where our sport is always entertaining for the people that are putting their money on the line to see it.
That's very well said. Well, John, I'm going to turn it back over to you because you do have a big announcement to make.
I don't know if it's a big announcement or anything, but, you know, I've really enjoyed doing this podcast with you, Sean, for the last year. I've had a lot of fun with it. We've done a lot of things that were sometimes crazy, a little bit, you know, a little sarcastic on some of the interviews and everything, but there comes a time where, I have got to step away from doing the podcast. I got a lot of things that, kind of conflict with what we're doing, and I need to make a choice. And my choice is, I'm going to continue doing what I do with refereeing and continue working the way I am. And the podcast right now is something that's was secondary, and it's going to have to remain secondary. But I loved working with you. I want to thank everybody that has tuned in to the podcast. It's not going to go away. I'm just going to take a step away from it for a while. I want to thank everybody that has supported it, everybody that's listened. I hope you've gotten something from it. I hope you've learned something more about our sport of MMA and some of the people that are part of it. My whole purpose of this was to help educate people so they understood it better, because I think an educated fan base is a better fan base. And I just want to say thank you to everyone for all that you have done in helping us grow this show. It's grown a ton. We got a great fan base, and I hope that fan base stays, because the show is going to continue on with Sean, and we're going to hopefully see it get just bigger and better from now on.
John, I'll speak from the heart. You're one of my absolute best friends. Our friendship will continue even though you're not continuing on this show. You'll still hear from me multiple times a week. I hope to hear from you still multiple times a week. But I will say this. I was a huge admirer of yours for probably 15 years before I ever met you. And I said this to somebody recently who asked me about you. I said, Big John is everything that you would hope that he would be. And I really mean that sincerely. And I think when it comes to people in combat sports, nobody has more integrity and nobody has more strength of character than you.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. You're wrong. I'm just not that good. But I do want to tell you, Sean, I've enjoyed my time with you. I've enjoyed, everything that, we've done together. I enjoy our friendship. That will not change. That will stay, the way it is. We just won't be talking on this show every week a couple of times.
Well, John, I'm going to be leaning on you for my new co-host, and all of you listening worldwide, I need ideas. We have a lot of options. Big John and I, since last year, have built a tremendous fan base, all thanks to you worldwide. So now we need to hear from you. Who do you want beside me on this show? Remember, I'm the vanilla ice cream, so we need someone to mix it up a little bit. Are you the Rocky Road, John? We need someone in that character. You can't have two very, very vanilla Midwestern guys like me. So someone who's going to tear it up.
I'm definitely the Rocky Road. I'm a little nuts, and I got a lot of marshmallows.
So email us your suggestions, info@letsgetitonpodcast.com. The show will most definitely continue. Our full archives, this is show number 70, will be up there, always free of charge. You can go back and play this shows. We know a lot of you have just found this in the last few months. So there are basically 15 months of shows that you can go back to and listen again on our website, letsgetitonpodcast.com. I already have some ideas, but no one is going to replace you. What we had here was really special. And aside from being a great person, a great referee, you're really a great broadcaster, John.
Thank you. I'm not that good a broadcaster, but you know what? You've made me better. So I appreciate all that you've done.
Well, John, thank you very much. And thanks to all of you listening worldwide. And again, please send in your suggestions. Let me know. info@letsgetitonpodcast.com. Also on Twitter @PodcastMMA. For the great Big John McCarthy, producers Chris Lakin and Brian Crock, and our entire crew, I'm Sean Wheelock. Thanks for listening, everyone. This has been a presentation of Lineup Media Group, online at lineupmediagroup.com.
Let's Get It On with Big John McCarthy and Sean Wheelock on the Lineup Media Group Podcast Network. Leave us a review on iTunes, Stitcher, Podbean, or wherever you listen to the show. If you have questions, comments, or are interested in sponsoring Let's Get It On, contact us at info@letsgetitonpodcast.com. Get all the Lineup Media Group podcasts like Jason Bucks and Panger on NHLpodcast.com, Ocho Man, Behind the Eight Ball, and You're on the Clock NFL on our website at lineupmediagroup.com.